In this section, we will look at launching on varying slopes and in varying wind conditions. In calm or light winds, a smooth acceleration allows you to control the canopy's position better without oscillations. The expert pilots make it look easy by using an exaggerated forward lean with bent knees and just enough brakes to keep the canopy overhead. A smooth acceleration does not mean your maximum acceleration. If you start out too quickly, then the canopy inflates suddenly, and the high drag will momentarily slow you down. It is more difficult to precisely control a rapidly rising canopy if your acceleration is also changing. In slow motion, you can see the pilot slowing while the canopy rises. It then arcs slightly too far forward, and the pilot reacts by accelerating his run and applying brakes. The combination of brakes and a faster speed causes the glider to lift him off his feet prematurely. At this smooth site, there is no real hazard from doing a touch and go during the launch run, but other sites can be less forgiving. Notice how smooth and controlled the next launch is. This expert pilot chooses to do a slow moon gallop, knowing he'll get airborne when the slope steepens. Novice pilots should strive for maximum speed during their light wind launch runs. Maximum speed can be attained by weighting the canopy with a good forward lean and bent knees with whatever brake application is required to keep the canopy stable overhead. If you are not yet flying after you have attained your maximum running speed, apply brakes gently to attain liftoff. If you use the brakes to lift off, then let them off slowly once clear of the ground to gain flying speed. An exaggerated forward lean puts your shoulders well in front of the risers. To keep from inadvertently pulling on the brakes, your arms should be extended to the rear, parallel to the ground. It is important that you learn to feel the proper amount of brake application by the pressure in your hands, not by the position of your arms. If your glider has long brake line travel or light brake pressure, you may find it beneficial to take one wrap of the brake lines around your hands after the glider is fully inflated and you are into your run. As the slopes become steeper, there are two readily noticeable effects. First, the canopy will pull upward more during inflation, and second, the canopy will seek an aerodynamic equilibrium position that will be more forward than on a shallower slope. On steeper slopes, the canopy will actually seek a position forward of straight up, and you will need to use the appropriate amount of brakes to keep the canopy from getting so far forward that gravity will force it further forward. The same exaggerated forward lean used to launch in light winds is also important in stronger winds. Keeping your weight forward adds a couple of miles per hour of speed to your wing and can help you penetrate forward during launch. There are many flying sites where you have minimal room to inflate on a shallow shelf just prior to a steep drop-off. In light winds, the canopy may seek a position further forward than desired as it tries to align itself with the local flow. You will need to apply more brake than normal to stop the canopy overhead. Failure to do this often results in a frontal collapse prior to launching. Perhaps not as evident are those launches in which the pilots detect the canopy getting too far forward and correct for it by accelerating their launch run while applying brake. Notice in this next series of clips the pilots almost leaping to catch up and weight the canopies at the edge. There's a fine line between these successful takeoffs and potentially dangerous frontal or asymmetric collapses at low altitude. Watch how this pilot uses an aggressive brake application to stabilize the canopy prior to his excellently controlled launch. Some cliff sites have plenty of room for inflation and a rounded lip for smooth, effortless launches, but many cliff sites are not so forgiving and require strong launch skills for dealing with rotor turbulence during the launch. In light winds, the rotor may be very close to ground level. Such a surface rotor is often indicated prior to inflation by the canopy's leading edge having a tendency to fold forward over itself. Having an assistant hold the leading edge upward several feet can help stabilize the inflation until the canopy is over the top of the rotor. Some cliffs are amazingly easy to launch from in winds of 6 to 10 miles per hour. Don't let them seduce you into thinking you know all there is about cliff launching. Make sure you consult your instructor and local pilots if you have any doubt on the proper technique. If you are new to either the site or the launch conditions, take the time to closely watch other pilots launch. Regardless of the slope, you should strive to lay out and pull up the canopy as directly into the wind as possible. If the winds aren't too strong, then it normally works best if you inflate on the top of the hill and then turn to proceed directly down the slope to launch. Use the appropriate brake pressure to keep the canopy centered overhead on your desired ground track. Once the canopy is inflated, keep it overhead with appropriate use of the brakes. Do not allow the crosswind to push you, or it will become increasingly difficult to control your direction of flight. This pilot fails to get the canopy square to the wind and it immediately starts pulling him sideways. He then fails to correct the heading quickly enough and is pushed around the side of the hill where the crosswind is increasingly severe. Although he launches successfully, the ending may be different if the terrain around the corner is less forgiving. This pilot is launching at the same spot immediately afterwards. He does a better job of keeping the canopy moving into the wind and only allows it to turn slightly so he can get airborne at a steeper part of the hill. To avoid getting pulled off your feet and losing your balance while launching in moderate winds, remember to moderate the glider's lift as it approaches overhead by pulling on the sea risers. In strong winds and steeper slopes, you may not be able to avoid being pulled airborne during the inflation. Be prepared for it and concentrate on immediately tracking away from the hill. Failure to do so immediately can cause you to rise into higher winds and be blown back behind the hill into dangerous rotor conditions. If you are blown back, it is often best to turn and run downwind so as to cross quickly through the rotor area with as much altitude as possible. If you determine that there is any problem with proceeding with the launch at this time, abort the launch by stopping your run. In light winds on a shallow slope, you may collapse the canopy behind you by either pulling both brakes or the rear risers fully. On steeper slopes, it may be best just to stop running and let the canopy nose over in front of you. You must ensure your canopy is safe to fly by a combination of visual inspection and feel. Watch what happens when this glider launches with a tangle in the left wing lines. Luckily, the takeoff was over friendly terrain.